Billionaire Ethan Gibson, determined to break the family's curse of ending without an heir, spent a fortune recruiting 10 candidate mothers and placed them together on his private island. On the day they arrived, Ethan announced publicly, "Whoever delivers his first heir will become the future mistress of the Gibson family." Greed grew faster than desire. Within just a few months, several women announced their pregnancies with great pride. However, they and their unborn children were thrown into the ocean and fed to sharks. The reason was simple. They had been found to be involved with other men. Every night, the screams coming from the harbor kept me awake. I was terrified because I had also had a single accidental encounter with Ethan, and I was now pregnant. When the day finally came and I saw what I had delivered, everything went dark before my eyes. Those mistresses who were fed to the sharks had at least carried human babies. I had given birth to 3 tiny puppies. The midwife I had secretly brought in barely glanced at my newborn before her medical tools scattered with a crash across the floor. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped to the ground out cold. An eerie silence filled the room, broken only by the soft, wet sounds of the 3 little ones on the bed, whimpering in my ears. Ow, ow. Their cries were faint but hit me like a sledgehammer. Puppies. That could not be right. How utterly bizarre. Lydia, the maid, clutched her mouth, her body quivering like she was caught in a gale. Monster, monster. Chloe, it's all over for you. It's really all over. To give birth to this. Don't you know what they'll do to you on this island? I was sprawled on the bed, drenched in a cold sweat. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the fear gripping me. This can't be happening. It has to be a mistake. I pinched my leg fiercely. It throbbed with pain. No, that nightmare was my reality. The 3 little creatures, eyes shut tight, nuzzled against me, their warmth against my skin. Panic overwhelmed me, and I burst into tears. This was it. The end of everything. Ethan Gibson would surely have me thrown to the sharks. Just days ago, another woman, one of the chosen, had twins. The island was abuzz, ready to throw a grand celebration. However, Ethan had dismissed them with a single glance, saying, "Not mine." She pleaded and swore her loyalty while the infants wailed. Ethan remained stone-faced, gave a dismissive wave, and like discarding garbage, his guards dragged them to the sea. Gunshots echoed, and they were gone, the water stained red with their blood, a feast for the sharks. That was the price for bearing humans. I had given birth to dogs. On that godforsaken island, they probably all thought I was cursed. Whispers about Ethan's family curse were everywhere, and he hated anything that even hinted at it. I was certain that they would have either tossed me to the sharks or, even worse, burned me alive without hesitation. Chloe opened the door. A man's voice shattered the silence outside. My heart slammed against my chest, gripped by an invisible hand. It was Ethan, the billionaire. That voice was etched in my memory. A year back, he declared that the woman who bore his child would become the Gibson family's queen bee. A swarm of women buzzed in, eyes on the prize. I was cornered, scrambling for cash to save my sick grandma, so I threw my hat in the ring. Somehow, my simple resume was the golden ticket. On the island, I knew I could not match Hannah's stunning looks, Larie's statuesque frame, or Wendy's blue-blooded charm. I was just biding my time, waiting for my consolation prize. However, then came a full moon night in the garden, where I stumbled upon Ethan, wild-eyed and not himself. The moon draped us in its glow, tracing our silhouettes. Heat rose by degrees, his touch tracing fire on my skin, his teeth tugging at my shirt button. An exotic scent filled the air, stoking a fire inside me, drawing me to him like a moth to a flame. That night, we were intimate, and he even left a bite mark on my neck. From that night, I got pregnant. Now voices pierced the silence again. Mr. Gibson. There's a birth. Lydia heard it. A chance to turn the tide. She dashed for the door, ready to spill the truth to Ethan. "Please don't say a word," I cried out, reaching to stop her. However, I was exhausted, having just given birth. I tried to lift myself up, only to fall back onto the bed with a thud. "It's not my problem. I don't want to die." Lydia did not care. Her screams pierced the air as she gripped the doorknob for dear life. Footsteps approached from outside. Ethan's armed bodyguards. I was petrified, struggling to breathe. "Why isn't this door opened? Don't want to let me in." Ethan's voice was icy, menacing like the angel of death. I can't. It won't budge." Lydia was on the verge of tears, her trembling hands unable to turn the knob. "Knock it down," Ethan commanded, cutting through the excuses. An instant later, a thunderous crash shook the heavy door. The lock screeched a metallic wail. The 3 little ones on the bed, sensing danger, fell silent. They clung to me, shivering against my stomach. As the door began to give way, I shut my eyes, hopeless. Just when things seemed dire, rapid footsteps echoed from down the hall. "Mr. Gibson." The butler rushed toward us, his voice laced with urgency. "There's trouble. The company's firewall is under a massive cyber attack. We need you to take charge now." The pounding stopped. What perfect timing for complications, Ethan muttered, a hint of annoyance in his voice. Got it. I'm on my way. His footsteps faded, and with them the suffocating tension. I slumped back on the bed, taking deep, ragged breaths. By some miracle I was alive. However, safety was still out of reach. I crawled to the floor, grabbed a cup of cold water, and threw it in the face of the midwife who had passed out. She jolted awake with a start. I snatched a pair of scissors and pressed them against her neck, my eyes locking onto Lydia with an icy glare. Seems like you've forgotten who Ethan is. He's got a short fuse and won't think twice about killing. If he learns that 3 freaks were born, he'll blame you for bringing a curse into this house. We'll only live through this if we act like nothing's out of the ordinary. The midwife and Lydia shared a worried look before nodding, their hands trembling. Without another word, they rushed out of the room. I did not truly relax until I heard the door click shut. However, my anxiety came rushing back when I glanced at the 3 little beings on the bed. No one could ever find out about them. I grabbed a pillow from the couch, stuffed it under my shirt, and faked still being pregnant. Over the next few days, I kept the 3 pups hidden away. They grew alarmingly fast though. In just a few weeks, they had turned into chubby furballs, bouncing and tumbling around. They had even started talking. Mommy, I'm hungry. I want some meat, Xylan, the oldest, said, hugging my leg and looking up at me with big innocent eyes. I clamped a hand over his mouth, my heart racing. Joe, remember, you're a dog. You can't talk like us. Tyrone, the middle one, was not having it, his ears perking up in defiance. We're not dogs. We're wolves. I gently ruffled their heads, whispering, wolves, humans, it doesn't matter. You only talk around me. Act like dogs with anyone else, or all of us will be in danger. The youngest, Ray, who was always the troublemaker, tilted his head and let out a fierce little howl. I'll bite them to keep you safe, Mommy. Their antics filled me with a mix of joy and sorrow. All I wished for was someone to take over as the Gibson family matriarch soon, so I could finally take my little ones home. One day, the shock hit me like a bolt from the blue. I had just gotten home from dinner when I realized the kids were missing. My heart skipped a beat, and I dashed out the door, not even bothering with shoes. I searched frantically, calling their names as I went. I was about to check the study when I caught sight of them. They were huddled around something glittering, chewing with determination. It's so tough. Mommy said chewing on hard stuff is good for our teeth. It hit me then what they were destroying. It was Ethan's prized family diamond, usually kept safe in the study's display case. Even the butler would not dare lay a finger on it. Yet there it was, covered in drool and scratches. I had just managed to pry the diamond away when a voice stopped me cold. Chloe, what on earth are you doing in Ethan's study? I turned around, my heart racing. Ethan was home, and with him was Wendy Lewis, a woman with her sights set on being the next Gibson family matriarch. She was the kind who would look down on anyone and was not above dirty tricks, like that time she pushed a pregnant woman down the stairs. Wendy's eyes locked onto the diamond and lit up with a mix of malice and thrill. Oh my God, that's Ethan's most precious heirloom. You had the nerve to take it and scratch it all up. Ethan just stared at the diamond, his silence heavy with unspoken threats. I could barely breathe. I bent over, bowing over and over, stammering my apologies. Mr. Gibson, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I didn't mean to ruin the diamond. In my panic, I moved too much, and the pillow I had stuffed under my shirt for some forgotten reason chose that moment to tumble out onto the floor with a thud. Under the table next to me, a trio of fluffy dog heads emerged. The room went eerily quiet. I glanced at the pillow on the ground. Then my sight moved toward my belly, now unmistakably flat. This was bad. Wendy, initially taken aback, suddenly erupted into loud, mocking laughter. Then she said, "You aren't even pregnant. You're faking a pregnancy and have the nerve to let these mutts mess up Ethan's prized possession." She whipped around, her voice sharp and cutting as she said, "Get her. And get these mongrels, too. Drag them out and toss them into the ocean." The bodyguard was on me in an instant, wrenching my arms behind me. I shut my eyes tight, bracing for the end. Hold on. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. Everyone froze. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at Wendy either. His eyes were on the 3 little pups, snarling at him. Ray even managed a defiant bark at Ethan. Woof! A flicker of hope stirred in me. In their final act, my little ones remembered my instructions and remembered to act the part. Ethan's expression turned inscrutable. He looked shocked, yet it was as if he was piecing something together. As my fate seemed sealed, Ethan stooped to pick up the diamond. He then casually patted each of the pups on the head, as if it were an afterthought. That bark was horrendous. Don't let there be a next time. With that, he walked away. Wendy stood there, her face a mask of disbelief. Then it was just Wendy and me in the study. In the suffocating silence, Wendy slowly turned to face me, her gaze venomous. She stared for a few seconds, then sneered. Don't think for a second that Ethan's mercy means you're safe. The role of the Gibson family matriarch is mine and mine alone. No one else stands a chance, she declared. With her head held high, she strutted off, deliberately slamming her shoulder into mine as she passed. I gripped my shoulder, my back slick with a cold sweat. In that instant, fear was the furthest thing from my mind. All I could think about was the puzzle of it all. Ethan was known for his ruthlessness, so why had he spared me? He did not even lose his temper when the family heirloom diamond got slobbered on by the pups. The 3 little pups seemed to sense they were in trouble, cautiously coming over to lick my hand. Don't cry, Mommy. The meanies who picked on you are gone now. I held them close, but the tears just kept coming. The next morning, Ethan took his helicopter on a business trip at the crack of dawn. He had barely left when my door was violently kicked open. Wendy stood there, makeup flawless, her gaze lethal. A line of muscular bodyguards flanked her, each one clutching a hefty hockey stick. With a sadistic grin, Wendy's eyes locked onto the pups. Ethan's too busy to deal with you, so I'll do the honors. First order of business, these filthy mutts can't stay. She snapped her fingers. Get rid of them. Beat those 3 dogs and flush them away. The bodyguards moved in. Stop, I screamed, throwing myself in front of my babies. They're not mutts. They're my precious ones. Ethan said it was over yesterday. What gives you the right to hurt them? What right? Wendy sneered as if I had told a joke, then landed a kick in my stomach. I'll be the Gibson family's leading lady, and you? You're nothing but a shameless imposter. With that, she signaled the guards, who grabbed my hair and threw me to the ground. The corner of the table hit me with a thud, sending a sharp pain through my skull. Blood streamed into my eyes, painting everything a hazy shade of red. The 3 little ones yelped in shock. Their words were not human, but somehow, I understood they were crying for their mom. In an instant, their eyes turned a chilling shade of blood red. Fur on end, they growled with a deep, menacing rage. The oldest Xylan lunged, sinking his teeth into the bodyguard's leg. Arg! He screamed as flesh ripped from his calf. Wendy stumbled back, then fury took over. Rabid beasts. Biting? Really? She lost it, screeching commands. You've got those sticks, right? Use them. Beat Chloe too. We'll tell Ethan it was just an accident. He won't blame me. A flurry of sticks rained down. Pain forgotten, I scrambled back, pulling the little ones into a fierce embrace. It's okay, my loves. Mommy's here. The sticks beat down like a storm on my back, shoulders, and legs. Each blow echoed with the thud of my bones. I clenched my teeth, refusing to let go. The kids whimpered in my arms. Stop hitting, Mommy. We'll bite you to death. Blood ran down my back. My sight dimmed. My mind started to slip. Was this the end? Maybe it was for the best. This time, I had shielded my children. As the heaviest stick was about to crash down on my head, the door burst open with a bang. A tall silhouette appeared, framed by the backlight. It was Ethan. His face darkened with fury as he took in the scene. Stop. Ethan's roar was not loud. It was low, guttural, a sound that vibrated in the bones of every person in the room. It was the sound of a predator who had just found someone touching his kill. The bodyguard with the hockey stick, a man built like a refrigerator named Boris, froze mid-swing. The stick, a blur of polished ash a second ago, stopped as if it had hit an invisible wall. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the violence. It was a vacuum, instantly filled by the ragged, wet sound of my breathing and the high-pitched, furious whimpers of the 3 pups trembling against my chest. Wendy, whose face had been twisted in a mask of sadistic glee, paled to the color of old bone. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. Ethan, she stammered, her voice a squeaky hinge. You're back. We weren't expecting you. That much is evident, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. He stepped fully into the room, his presence sucking the air out of it. His eyes, chips of glacial ice, swept over the scene. The overturned furniture, the splatters of my blood on the floor, the whimpering pups, and finally me. A broken doll clutching 3 small, furry bodies. His gaze lingered on the blood matting my hair and the dark, spreading stain on my back. Something flickered in the depths of his eyes. A flash of an emotion so primal and raw it was gone before I could name it. Boris, still holding the stick, decided to be an idiot. Mr. Gibson, sir, there's been an incident. These animals attacked. Ms. Lewis said. Did I address you? Ethan cut him off, his head swiveling toward the bodyguard with a mechanical, predatory precision. Did I open my mouth and form words in your direction? Boris's jaw clamped shut, the muscles in his neck bulging. He dropped the stick as if it had suddenly caught fire. It clattered on the hardwood floor, a deafening sound in the quiet. Wendy, ever the opportunist, tried to seize the narrative. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her designer skirt, a tremulous, desperate smile playing on her lips. Ethan, darling, it's a simple misunderstanding. The girl was hysterical. Those things, they're dangerous. They bit one of your men. Look. She gestured dramatically to the guard on the floor, who was clutching his bleeding leg, a chunk of his calf missing. Ethan didn't even glance at the man. His eyes were fixed on the 3 little pups. Xylan, Tyrone, and Ray had stopped whimpering. They had turned, placing their tiny bodies between their mother and the threat. Their fur, slick with my blood, was standing on end. A low, continuous growl rumbled from their chests, a sound no puppy should be able to make. Their eyes, still glowing with an eerie red light, were locked on Ethan. It was a standoff. A billionaire titan of industry versus 3 small, furry creatures who had just tasted blood for the first time. Ethan, are you listening to me? Wendy's voice pitched higher, a note of panic creeping in. They're monsters. We have to dispose of them, and the girl too. Who knows what kind of freakish, unholy curse she's brought into your home? Monsters, Ethan repeated, the word rolling off his tongue as if he were tasting a fine wine. He took a step closer, not to Wendy but to us. The pup's growls intensified, a symphony of miniature thunder. I tightened my arms around them, trying to offer a comfort I didn't feel, my body screaming in protest. He crouched down, his expensive suit pants straining against his thighs, bringing his face just a few feet from the snarling trio. An act of either supreme confidence or utter madness. The air crackled with a strange, static energy. He studied them, his head tilting. He wasn't looking at them with disgust or fear. He was looking at them with curiosity, a deep, analytical fascination. He reached out a hand, long fingers extended. No. I croaked, trying to pull them back. Quiet, he commanded without looking at me. Ray, the smallest and most volatile, snapped at his fingers, his tiny teeth clicking shut just a millimeter from Ethan's skin. A normal man would have flinched. Ethan didn't. He just smiled. It was a thin, enigmatic curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. Spirited, he murmured almost to himself, just like the legends said they would be. A shockwave went through me. What legends? What did he know? Wendy's face was a mask of pure frustration. Ethan, what are you doing? Step away from those vermin. Boris, do something. Boris, caught between the wrath of his boss and the shrill commands of his boss's apparent consort, took an uncertain step forward. It was a fatal mistake. Ethan moved so fast he was a blur. One moment he was crouched, the next he was standing, his hand clamped around Boris's throat. He didn't squeeze, just held the man immobile with a thumb pressed into the hollow of his neck. Did you just try to give an order to my man? Ethan asked, his voice a silken knife. You are a guest in my house, Wendy. A guest whose presence I am beginning to find remarkably taxing. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The sheer casual control, the promise of violence held in perfect stasis, was more terrifying than any scream. He released Boris, who stumbled back, gasping and clutching his neck, a look of pure terror on his face. Clean this up, Ethan said, his tone reverting to a bored command, as if he were ordering a coffee. He gestured vaguely at the blood on the floor and the wounded guard. All of you, get out. The medical team will tend to Ms. Chloe. But Ethan, Wendy tried one last time. Now. The single word was a door slamming shut. It was final. It was the promise of absolute, irreversible consequences. The bodyguards scrambled, half carrying their groaning comrade. They fled the room like rats from a sinking ship. Wendy stood frozen for a moment, her perfectly made-up face a ruin of shock and humiliation. Her gaze met mine, and I saw a hatred so pure, so concentrated. It felt like a physical blow. This wasn't over. I knew it. She would kill me. She would kill my children. It was just a matter of time. Then, with a choked sob of pure, theatrical fury, she swept out of the room. The door clicked shut, and we were alone. Me, Ethan, and the 3 pups. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The pups' growls had subsided, but their tiny bodies were still tense, vibrating with nervous energy. Ethan just stood there, looking down at us. I must have been a pathetic sight. A trembling, bleeding girl, barefoot in a ruined nightgown, clutching 3 muddy, blood-spattered dogs. You should stand up, he said, his voice detached. You're losing blood. Only then did the shock begin to recede, and the true, deep-seated agony of my wounds hit me. It was a wave of white-hot fire that started in my back and skull and radiated outwards. I gasped, a strangled cry escaping my lips. I tried to move, but my body just wouldn't obey. The pups, sensing my distress, began to whine, nudging me with their wet noses. Mommy, don't be sad, Xylan whimpered, his voice a tiny, clear bell in my mind. I'll bite the bad man, Tyrone declared, though he was shaking like a leaf. It hurts, Mommy? Ray asked, his crimson eyes dimming back to their normal dark brown. Shoo shoo, my loves, I whispered, the motion of speaking sending fresh spikes of pain through my skull. It's okay. It's okay. Ethan watched the interaction, his expression unreadable. He must have thought I was delirious, talking to dogs. He didn't give any sign he had heard their side of the conversation. Instead, he walked to a side cabinet, poured a glass of water from a crystal decanter, and brought it to me. He didn't help me drink it, just placed it on the floor within reach. Then he did something that completely shattered my reality. He picked up a blanket that had fallen off the couch and, with surprising gentleness, draped it over my shaking shoulders. His hand, cold and impossibly steady, brushed a strand of bloody hair from my face. The accident Wendy will be telling me about, he said calmly. Explain it. In your own words. It wasn't a request. It was a test. A single chance to tell my story. My mind was a fog of pain and terror, but one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. The truth was insane, but a lie would be my death sentence. I looked into his eyes, those fathomless gray pools, and I made a choice. The only one left. I would tell him everything. There's nothing to explain, I whispered, my voice rasping. My tongue felt thick and clumsy. I was shielding my children. They are my children. They were protecting me. Wendy wanted to kill them. He didn't react. She says they are dogs. She says you faked your pregnancy. I took a shuddering breath. The pillow that had fallen out earlier lay on the floor like a damning piece of evidence. I did. I faked it. Because. I looked down at the three terrified, brave little creatures who were staring up at me with such love. Look at them. What was I supposed to do? Tell you I gave birth to puppies? Wait for you to have me dragged to the sharks like the others? He followed my gaze. The pups, perhaps sensing they were the subject of discussion, had gone very still. Zylan, the boldest, looked directly at Ethan and let out the smallest, most pathetically unconvincing woof possible, clearly remembering my earlier lessons. Ethan's lips twitched, just for a millisecond. The others, he said, and his voice dropped to a frequency that vibrated with a dark, hidden truth, were not my children. They were attempts at deception. Their blood was human, but they were not mine. I didn't understand, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. How do you know? I breathed. This time he smiled. It was a wolf smile. A curse has been on the Gibson family for 500 years. We do not sire humans. Not anymore. The butler's cyber attack was a fabrication. I have been watching, Chloe. I have been waiting. Everyone else lied. You, despite your profound lack of talent for it, told the truth out of sheer desperation. He paused, his gaze intensifying. The family diamond they were chewing on? It's not a diamond. It's a fossilized bone from the first of my line. It can only be broken by his true-blooded heirs. The world tilted on its axis. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion, it all faded into the background as his words rearranged the very fabric of my reality. He knew. He had always known. The full moon, the madness, the bite on my neck. It wasn't just passion. It was a claiming. An animalistic, ancient ritual. You're not human, I whispered, the words a horrifying accusation and a wondrous revelation all at once. His smile remained. In the old country, they had a name for us. My great-grandfather moved us here, to a private island, to hide. We are Varkalak. What you would call a werewolf. I stared at him. Then I looked down at the three pups who were now, with a touch more confidence, licking the dried blood from my hands. Wolves. They had told me. They weren't dogs. They were wolves. That night in the garden, I started, my mind reeling back to the scent of strange flowers, the strength of his hands, the bite that had felt like it had seared my soul. It is the only way, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. A true heir. A natural-born Varkalak. It cannot be forced or manufactured. It is a chance. One single chance under the full moon. Every woman who came to this island was a gamble. A calculated attempt to find a compatible vessel. They all failed. They all lied, taking up with guards, with groundskeepers, trying to pass off their bastards as my heirs. You, the one who tried to hide, the one who wanted to leave. You were the only one who succeeded. He stood up then, his imposing height blocking the light. Give them names, he commanded, his tone returning to that of the lord of the island. I already have. I said, my voice trembling with a torrent of unprocessed emotion. A hope so fierce it felt like pain was blooming in my chest. Zylan, Tyrone, and Ray. He nodded, a swift, decisive motion. Zylan, Tyrone, Ray, he repeated, as if sealing a pact. He looked at them, and his expression, for the first time, shed its mask of cold indifference. A fierce, possessive, almost painful pride shone in his gray eyes. He was a king looking at his princes. They will need training. They will need to learn what they are. He turned and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the frame, his back to me. Rest, Chloe. Recover your strength. No one will harm you or my sons again. He didn't look back. You are no longer a candidate mother, living on the fringe of a hope. You are the mother of the Gibson heirs. This island is no longer your prison. He opened the door, letting the sterile light of the hallway flood into the room. It is your den. Defend it accordingly. And with that he was gone. The door clicked shut with a soft, definitive finality. I was left in the bloodstained room, wrapped in a blanket, with my three impossible, wonderful, wolf pups. The fear didn't vanish. It was just joined by something else. Something new. A mother's ferocity. I looked at my children and realized he was right. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was home. And I would tear apart anyone who threatened my pack. The days that followed were surreal. A medical team, sworn to absolute secrecy under penalty that I could only imagine, treated my wounds with a balm that smelled of pine and lightning. It healed the bruises and cuts at a rate that defied medical science. A new room was prepared, grander than any I had seen, with a private, walled garden attached. A nursery wing, they called it. It was more like a fortress. The pups, no my sons, adapted to their true nature with a speed that was both thrilling and terrifying. Ethan was a constant, looming presence. He didn't coddle them. He was not a loving father in the human sense. He was an alpha, teaching his young. The first lesson came 3 days after my beating. Ethan appeared in the doorway of the garden at dusk. Xylan, Tyrone, and Ray were tumbling in the grass, chasing fireflies. Their barks and yips were still a little too deep, their movements a little too coordinated. They are fast, Ethan observed, his voice a low rumble. But their instincts are raw, unfocused. He walked to the center of the garden and gave a sharp, low-pitched whistle. It wasn't a sound meant for human ears. It resonated in my chest. A primal call that made my heart stutter. The pups froze. Their ears, which had been floppy just a week ago, were now fully erect, swiveling toward the sound. Their eyes blazed red in the gathering twilight. Tonight, Ethan announced, they learned to hunt. My blood ran cold. They're just babies, Ethan. He turned his gaze on me. They are predators who can speak and think. Their minds are developing even faster than their bodies. If they do not learn to channel the predator, they will become the prey. The instinct will curdle into madness. That is the curse, Chloe. The beast must be fed and controlled, or it will consume them from the inside. He gave another whistle, then vaulted over the 7-foot garden wall with an effortless grace that stole my breath. A moment later, a terrified, bleeding goat was tossed back over, landing with a soft thud on the grass. It scrambled to its feet, its eyes rolling in panic. The pups didn't hesitate. It wasn't a game anymore. Ray was the first to move, a streak of silver-brown fur. He didn't bark. The silence was the most horrifying part. Xylan flanked left, Tyrone flanked right. It was a textbook pack maneuver, an instinct engraved in their DNA. The goat bolted, but it was over in seconds. They moved like liquid shadows, bringing the animal down with a coordinated mix of speed and savage, precise bites. I wanted to look away. A city girl down to my core, every instinct screamed that this was wrong to witness. But I couldn't, because I saw their eyes. As they stood over their kill, their muzzles stained red, they looked at Ethan. They weren't wild beasts. They were students looking for their teacher's approval. Ethan crouched beside them, his massive frame still dwarfing them. He didn't offer praise. He simply reached down and, with his bare hand, opened a tear in the goat's hide. Good technique, he said, his voice clinical. But next time, Xylan, you commit half a second earlier. Your hesitation could allow the prey to gore your brother. Xylan whined, but it sounded like an affirmative. He understood. That was their life now. By day, they were my sweet, clumsy boys, demanding meat and head scratches, their little tails wagging so hard their whole bodies shook. They spoke to me of their dreams, of chasing giant rabbits through forests of towering bones. We cuddled, and I read them stories, and they asked a million questions about the world. Mommy, what is a bus? Mommy, why is the sky blue on Tuesdays? That one from Ray gave me pause. But by night, they trained with their father. They learned to track a scent that was 3 days old. They learned to communicate with subtle shifts in posture and flashes of their eyes. They learned to partially shift, a terrifying sight where their small, puppy-like bodies would suddenly be racked with the sounds of cracking bones. Their forms elongating, jaws unhinging, claws extending, only to snap back a moment later. They were learning to control the monster, as Ethan called it. One night, after a particularly grueling session where Ethan had pushed them to hold a partial shift for a full minute, I finally broke my silence. The boys were asleep in a pile in front of the fireplace, utterly exhausted, their little legs twitching as they dream-chased. Why do you push them so hard? I asked, my voice tight with a mother's anxiety. They have a lifetime to learn this. He was staring into the flames, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't drink from it. He never seemed to eat or drink for sustenance. They may not have a lifetime, Chloe. Our existence is a secret that has been kept for centuries. But secrets have a way of getting out. What do you mean? He swirled the liquid, watching the light catch in its depths. The Gibson family amassed this fortune not out of greed, but for protection. This island, the private security force, the politicians on our payroll, it's all a fortress wall. But there were others in the old country, other packs. And they were not as discreet. His jaw tightened, a muscle flicking in his cheek. There are those who hunt us. Not with pitchforks and torches, but with secret government budgets and special operatives. They call themselves the Silver Order. A foolish name, but their science is not foolish. They know what to look for. Unusual activity, strange deaths, reports of large wolves. My heart began to pound a slow, dread-filled rhythm. You think they found us? The cyber attack. That was a probe, Ethan confirmed, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. A spearfishing expedition. A data mining algorithm looking for anomalies in our financials and security logs. I traced it back to a server in Langley, Virginia before I had it destroyed. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes held a weight I had never seen before. A weariness, and a chilling resolve. The game is changing. This is no longer just about producing an heir. It's about securing the future of our entire bloodline. They must be ready. Xylan's intelligence, Tyrone's raw strength, Ray's sheer unpredictable ferocity. They are our best hope. They are the alphas this line has been waiting for a century to produce. The next morning, Wendy Lewis's luggage was unceremoniously dumped on the helipad. Her protests could be heard echoing across the entire island as Boris, his neck still bearing the faint shadow of a bruise from Ethan's fingers, and another guard escorted her onto the helicopter. She screamed threats of lawsuits, of exposing their filthy little island breeding project to all the tabloids. I watched from my bedroom window, the 3 pups at my heels, their heads cocked. Bad lady is going away, Tyrone observed, a satisfied rumble in his small chest. Good riddance, Xylan added. Ethan appeared beside me, silent as always. Her father's company will be bankrupt within the quarter. She'll be too busy working at a car wash to talk to any tabloids. It was a casual, brutal statement of fact. That was Ethan's justice. Absolute and final. But even as I felt a grim satisfaction, a deep unease settled in my stomach. As the helicopter carrying Wendy rose and banked toward the mainland, I saw a glint in her eyes, visible even from this distance. It wasn't despair. It was a furious, unhinged promise of vengeance. My mother's intuition screamed that this wasn't the end of Wendy Lewis. It was only the beginning. The weeks passed and settled into a strange new rhythm. We were a family, but a family forged in blood and moonlight. I was no longer a prisoner, but I wasn't entirely free either. I was the mother of the heirs, a position of immense, unspoken power. The staff, a skeleton crew of fiercely loyal retainers who had served the Gibsons for generations, treated me with a new deference, a bowing and yes madam, that I never got used to. One such retainer was an old woman I had never seen before. She arrived one day without announcement, just a hunched figure in a black shawl, moving through the hallways with a silent, gliding walk. Her name was Marta, and her face was a map of 1,000 wrinkles, her eyes 2 bright, black beads that missed nothing. Ethan introduced her with an unusual formality. Marta is a seer. She has served our family since before my grandfather's time. She is here to assess our sons. Marta didn't bow to me. She just peered up, her gaze so sharp it felt like she was dissecting my soul. Then she smiled, a gummy, toothless expression that was somehow not reassuring. The vessel is strong, she croaked, her voice like dry leaves skittering on stone. Broader hips than I expected. Good. The blood held true. I bristled at being called a vessel, but held my tongue. She spent the afternoon with the boys in the garden. No strenuous exercises, no prey to be taken down. She just sat on a stone bench, watching them. She performed a series of tests using simple items. A silver coin, a sprig of monkshood, a bowl of pure spring water. When the silver coin was placed before them, they all hissed and recoiled, their eyes flashing red involuntarily. The monkshood they sniffed at with a wary disgust. But the bowl of water, Ray, ever the boldest, was the first to touch his nose to it. The moment he did, the surface of the water didn't just ripple. It seemed to churn from within, growing darker, a miniature, contained storm in a porcelain bowl. Xylan and Tyrone followed suit, and each had a similar but unique effect on the water. Xylan's water formed into a tiny, spinning vortex, while Tyrone's froze into a solid block of ice in a matter of seconds. Marta cackled, a sound of pure, malevolent glee. A seer, a stormcaller, and an ice-bringer, she exclaimed, clapping her gnarled hands together. 3 gifts. In 500 years, we have only produced 1 gift every other generation. Oh, the Silver Order will want these ones badly. Very, very badly. My blood ran cold. Ethan, standing beside me, didn't flinch, but I saw the knuckles on the hand resting on my shoulder turn white. They will not get them, he said, a statement of pure, impenetrable will. Marta fixed her beady eyes on him. The walls have ears, young alpha. And they have teeth. The one you banished, the Lewis woman, she reeks of betrayal. She has spoken words into the wrong ears. The hunters have heard. They are coming. And just like that, the fragile piece of our lives was shattered. Paranoia became our new constant companion. The island's security measures, already formidable, were redoubled. The guards, who used to carry concealed sidearms, now openly carried modified automatic rifles with silver-plated ammunition. Ethan spent less time in his office and more on the training grounds, a ferocious intensity driving him and our sons harder than ever. The pups, no longer looking much like pups at all, were now the size of full-grown German shepherds, their fur a thick silver-brown coat, their eyes possessing a permanent, intelligent gleam. They understood the stakes. Their play fighting had an edge now, a brutal realism. They were no longer just learning to hunt goats. They were learning to fight and kill bipedal threats. One evening, as I was bringing them their dinner, a massive platter of raw venison, Lydia, the maid who had once tried to betray me, came running into the room. She had become a skittish, perpetually terrified creature since the birth. My threat and Ethan's cold fury had broken something in her. Now, she was simply a bundle of nerves held together by fear. Ms. Chloe. Mr. Gibson. She gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the large flat-screen monitor on the wall. It was linked to the island's external surveillance system. A boat. A boat is coming. The screen showed the dark, churning expanse of the night ocean. And on it, moving fast and without running lights, was a rigid-hull inflatable boat. It was full of men in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. "They're here," I whispered. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. The next moments were a blur of controlled chaos. Ethan appeared, his face a mask of cold, predatory calm. He had changed into a simple black combat suit, his body radiating a coiled, lethal energy. He handed me a heavy, silver-plated pistol. "You remember how to shoot?" I nodded, my hand trembling only a little as I checked the magazine. He had insisted on training me. "Stay in the panic room with Marta and the staff," he commanded, his eyes already glowing with an inner amber light. "It will hold them. We will handle the rest." "Ethan." He silenced me with a look. Not a harsh look, but one of intense, burning focus. "I have waited my entire life for them to be born. I will not let a pack of mercenaries in tactical gear take them from me. We are Varkalak. This is our territory. And tonight we defend it." He strode toward the front door, and 3 massive wolves fell into step behind him. They were no longer my little boys. Xylan, Tyrone, and Ray, fully transformed, were monstrous. Their shoulders reached my waist, their heads broad and powerful, their fangs like rows of ivory daggers. Xylan's eyes held a calm, calculating intelligence. Tyrone's frame was a mountain of muscle and fury. And Ray was a phantom, a flicker of pure, violent speed. I ran to the panic room, a steel-reinforced bunker hidden behind the library. Marta was already there, her eyes closed, humming a low, discordant tune. Lydia was weeping in a corner. I slammed the heavy door shut, locking us in, and went to the monitor bank that showed the live feeds from all over the island's exterior. I watched the horror unfold. The tactical team landed on the North Beach, moving with professional, silent precision. 12 men, all heavily armed. Their point man gave a series of hand signals, and they fanned out, heading toward the main house. And then, the shadows came alive. A massive, silver-brown shape, Tyrone, I realized, simply barreled out of the treeline. He hit the first 2 men like a furry freight train. The sound was sickening, a wet, snapping crunch of bone and Kevlar. Bullets started flying, tracer rounds hissing through the dark, but the wolves were never where the gunfire was aimed. Ethan was a terrifying maestro of death. He didn't fully shift. He moved in his half-form, a towering, muscular beast of claws and fangs, walking upright. He intercepted the main group with a chilling, silent grace, his claws disemboweling a man before he could even raise his rifle. He was a ghost of rending flesh and broken weapons. Ray was a nightmare I couldn't track. A muzzle would appear from the darkness, clamp onto a man's ankle, and drag him screaming into the underbrush. A second later, the screaming would stop. He was a master of guerrilla terror, using their own fear as a weapon. But it was Xylan who was the most chilling. He had climbed onto the roof of the boathouse and was just watching. His glowing red eyes surveyed the battlefield. I saw 2 mercenaries trying to flank Ethan, raising their rifles. Before they could fire, a massive, heavy wooden cargo net, hanging from a crane, suddenly swung free, sweeping them both into the freezing ocean. It wasn't wind. It wasn't luck. Xylan's head tilted, watching them struggle in the water, and I realized he was using his mind. He was a telekinetic. Then the leader of the mercenaries, a huge man with a face full of scars, did something unexpected. He signaled a retreat, but not toward the boat. He and a few remaining men made a desperate, suicidal charge toward the house. They weren't trying to win the fight. They were executing a different part of their mission. A secondary objective. On the monitor for the library hallway, I saw them. They were using some kind of high-tech thermal lance to cut through the panic room steel door. The metal was starting to glow cherry red. "Oh God," Lydia wailed. "They're coming in. They're coming in for us." The lance broke through. With a screech of tortured metal, a section of the door fell inward, crashing onto the floor. The Scarface leader stepped through the smoke, his eyes cold and emotionless, locking onto me. "You must be the mother," he said, his voice a flat, Midwestern monotone, a stark contrast to the carnage he'd navigated to get there. He raised his weapon, not a rifle, but a bulky pistol-shaped device with a glowing blue vial. A tranquilizer gun, I guessed. "For me. If you come quietly, the Silver Order may yet show you mercy." Lydia screamed. Marta stopped humming. And that's when the ceiling collapsed. Not just a tile, but a massive section of the roof, brought down by a focused wave of sonic force. Xylan stood at the edge of the new hole, his silhouette massive against the night sky, his psychic roar making every piece of glass in the room shatter. The mercenaries were thrown to the ground, clutching their ears. In that split second of chaos, the Scarface leader's gun went off. But the dart didn't hit me. Lydia, in a final desperate act, had thrown herself in front of me. The blue-feathered dart buried itself in her neck. Her eyes went wide with surprise, and she crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The act she had once failed to perform, loyalty, she had finally, tragically accomplished. There was no time to mourn. Ethan and the other two wolves surged into the room from the shattered hallway. It was over in seconds. It was brutal. It was final. When the last mercenary fell, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the crackling of small fires and the distant, panicked wail of an alarm. Ethan, his half-form receding, his clothes shredded, walked to the Scarface leader's body and kicked away his weapon. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. He looked at me, then at the three massive wolves, now padding softly into the room, their muzzles slick and red. "It has begun," he said, his voice hoarse. Marta, who had been entirely unfazed by the destruction, finally rose from her chair. She hobbled over and knelt beside the dead mercenary leader, her gnarled fingers tracing the design on his shoulder patch. A silver circle bisected by a single, jagged line of black. "The first wave," she croaked. "To test our defenses. To taste our strength. Now they know. They will not come back with a small team." She looked up at Ethan, her black eyes swirling with a prophetic dread. "They will come back with an army." I sank to my knees, the cold from the shattered concrete seeping into my bones. I pulled my three sons to me, feeling the immense power and heat radiating from their monstrous forms. They were no longer just my children. They were weapons. And the entire world was about to come for them. I looked at the single, silver-plated pistol I still clutched in my hand. A mother's ferocity, Ethan had called it. He was right. But looking at my sons, I knew a simple pistol wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough to face what was coming. We needed a new plan. We couldn't just defend our island den. We had to take the fight to them. The Gibson pack was no longer prey. We were going to become the hunters.